Hello to all my story lovers. Today's story name is The Unending Story. This is story written by Sudha Murty. Before go through the story, please subscribe my channel. Like it, share it. Now let's go through the story. I want a story. That's an order, shouted King Pratap Singh of Mayanagar. King Pratap was only 15 years old and still a boy at heart. He didn't like being a king much because he was supposed to be doing serious things like keeping the law, listening to his people's problem, and all kinds of dirty things like that. The only part he liked about the being ruler was that everyone had to obey him. How he loved giving orders and making all kinds of demands. And what he loved the most was listening to stories. Every day he insisted on listening to at least 10 stories. All the storytellers in his kingdom line up at his court. They told him funny stories, scary stories, magical stories, and anything else that came to their mind. King Pratap listened to all with rapt attention. He loved stories and storytellers so much that whenever he heard a good tale, he would shower the teller with gold, silver, and all kinds of wonderful presents. His ministers sighed and shook their heads and tried to explain, Your Majesty, stories are all very well, but you should be listening to them after your work is done. Your people need you to do so many things for them. If you spend all your time wrapped up in fantasies, how will the land prosper? But King Pratap paid no attention. It was stories he wanted and stories he would get. But how long could the people provide him with the stories? Soon the tales began to dry out. Some tried to cleverly tell him once they had related long back, but Pratap was sharp as a needle. I have heard that one. Off with his head for repeating a story. Oh, how his minister had to plead with him to pardon the culprits. Finally, disgusted with all the storytellers in his land, the king announced, I want someone to tell me a story that will go on and on till I ask him to stop. Anyone who can do this will get half my kingdom as a prize. His ministers were even more horrified at this. Half the kingdom to some woolly headed writer? Teller of stories? How horrible! They all tried to show the king the foolishness of his ways, but he was adamant. A story that lasted for days, even weeks, was what we wanted, that was that. Soon a long line of men and women appeared at his court. Each one wanted to win a big prize, but none of their stories were good enough for King Pratap. Boring, he shouted at some. Rubbish, he yelled the others. Cock and bull, he bellowed at yet others. Meanwhile, work on the kingdom's affairs had come to stop. All the ministers were sitting, wringing their hands and wondering how to bring back their king to solving all the important issues. Finally, the chief minister, who was wise and clever, had an idea. The next day, a scurvy, crazy looking man turned up at the court. His hair was in a mess, his clothes were half torn, and his feet he wore torn shoes from which his toes stuck out. He marched up to the palace and demanded to be given an audience with the king. The guards sighed and let him in. They were used to having all kinds of characters turning up at the gates wanting to tell stories to the king. The old man was admitted into the king's chamber. There he made himself comfortable, drank a huge jug of water, and without introducing help, started his story. This story begins in a humble farmer's field. The farmer had toiled days, weeks, and months and grown a bumper crop of a sugar cane. He sold the sugarcane to the nearby sugar factory and they made sacks and sacks of sugar out of it. Everyone was so happy. All this sugar would be sold in the market and make everyone very rich. That year, their children would get nice new clothes, their stores would be full of food, and their wives would be very happy with them. Now, all that sugar had to be stored and kept carefully till the sacks could be taken to the market to sell. The factory people poured the sugar into many sacks and lugged them into a storeroom. In the storeroom, who would you find but a colony of ants? They had decided that building their house near such a ready supply of their favorite food was a very good idea and were always on the lookout for new batches of sugar to be stored there. No sooner had the sacks been kept than the lines of ants marched up to them. They found little holes to make their way in, and the first ant went into the first bag of sugar, took one sugar crystal and went back. The next ant went into the bag and took a crystal and returned home. Another went into the bag and took a crystal and returned home. Yet another went into the bag and took a crystal and returned home. So on and on the storyteller droned. King Pratap found he had nearly dozed off. The day had passed by, he was still listening to the same story. Stop, stop, he ordered. I will listen to the rest of the story tomorrow. The next morning, the old man turned up as usual and started from where he had left off the previous day. Yesterday I was telling you how the ants came and picked up the sugar crystal. Now the next ant went towards the bag of sugar, took a crystal and went back home. Another went, took a sugar crystal and returned home. Another ant. The story went on like this. Lunch and dinner passed by, but nothing new happened. By now, King Pratap was bursting with rage. How dare anyone tell him such a boring story? What kind of story is this? He complained. What will happen next? What happened to the farmer? But the old man only smiled and said, have patience, your majesty. That year the yield very good, and there were thousands of bags of sugar. I have to tell you how the ants collected all the sugar. Oh, stop, stop, Pratap shouted. Stop this boring story at once. The man now stood up and said, fine, if you are ordering me to stop, I have won the prize. Give me half your kingdom. The king was in dilemma now. He had announced a competition and prize, no doubt. But could he honestly give away half the kingdom to this crazy looking storyteller with his boring tales? As he sat pondering, the man grinned even wider and took off his dirty robe, rubbed off the dirt from his face, and shook back his shaggy white hair. Everyone was astonished. Why, this was the chief minister himself. Don't worry, your majesty, the minister told his overjoyed king. I did not want half your kingdom. I only wanted to show you how you were wrong to neglect your work and listen to the stories night and day. Your people deserve a good king, someone who will work hard to look after them, someone who will think of his own happiness only once his people are happy. That's what good things kings do. Do you know? Not just giving orders and enjoying yourself. Poor Pratap looked ashamed at this. Yes, he had been an extremely selfish king. From now on, story time was only at night. After all, his work was done. Now this is the end of the story. Do you like it? Then comment it. Subscribe my channel. Bye bye.